Hi, let's talk about an introduction to blood. In this video, we'll discuss how blood works as part of the cardiovascular system, the functional relationships between blood and interstitial fluid, the important physicochemical properties of blood, how the carbonic acid bicarbonate ion buffer system works to maintain blood plasma pH homeostasis, and finally, how, with blood as a solution, various solutes in the blood may vary. So the cardiovascular system is an important body system that connects with just about every other system in the body. It consists of three commonly held constituents: the heart, the vasculature, and the blood. And oftentimes I like to include lymphatics under cardiovascular system, although it's typically treated as its own independent system. So the heart is the pump that pushes the blood through all of the vasculature to deliver oxygenated blood and nutrients to metabolically active tissues and to retrieve waste products, metabolites, back to the appropriate places for removal from the body, such as the respiratory system or the urinary system, etc. Now, the area of action for the cardiovascular system is the capillary bed, and it's around the capillary beds that we have the exchange of materials from the blood out into the interstitial fluid. That is the material that surrounds cells or the body's tissues. And so we have a filtering of products from the blood out into the interstitial fluid, and we also have a reabsorption of products from that interstitial fluid back into the blood. Now, typically, filtration is not entirely balanced by reabsorption. And so that's where the lymphatics come in to absorb all of that excess filtrate and return it back to venous blood supply. But we'll discuss the details of that in lymphatics videos. Now, the functions of blood can fall into three major buckets: transportation, regulation, and protection. Under transportation, we can think of the individual elements that are moved throughout the blood, and we can specifically link them to individual other systems that the cardiovascular system is connecting to. So, for instance, gases is kind of a no-brainer. The respiratory system helps us to absorb oxygen in the body, and it allows for us to remove carbon dioxide from the body. Nutrients. The digestive system absorbs nutrients, and those nutrients are picked up by the cardiovascular system and distributed throughout all the metabolically active tissues. Waste products. Waste products are generated as metabolites of cellular metabolisms of active tissues, and they can be distributed, through respiratory system, urinary system, etc. Various hormones created by endocrine tissues and cytokines can be produced and distributed throughout the blood. In terms of regulation, we have the regulation of pH homeostasis, which we'll discuss with the bicarbonate buffer system. There's also a regulation of temperature. So in controlling where blood goes, through which vessels, we can either allow it to go closer to the skin or keep it farther from the skin where we can exchange heat. We can also keep blood from flowing out to the extremities as much as possible if we want to preserve that temperature. Water balance is another means by which the blood can be regulated, and this occurs with the help of the kidneys. In terms of protection, the immune system lives in part within the blood. It also lives in part within the lymphatic system and in part within tissues. And then finally, blood can protect itself, or can maintain its own integrity through clotting whenever there is a disruption within the vasculature. So, transportation, regulation, and protection. And we'll see how these three large functions are played out throughout the cardiovascular system. Now, when we look at the physical profile of blood, there are some physicochemical properties that are important to understand. For instance, blood is more viscous than water. It is thicker than water, and that's pretty obvious because water is the main constituent of blood, and by adding various solutes to it, proteins, formed elements, etc., that contributes to an increase in this viscosity. Blood has an average temperature of about 38 degrees Celsius. That's about 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit if we were to measure the temperature of the blood directly. It has an average pH of 7.35 to 7.45. So physiologically, this range would be what we would refer to as physiologically neutral. Anything greater than this range would be alkaline. Anything less than this range would be acidic. In terms of its color, blood is generally between red and purple. More oxygenated blood or hemoglobin that's bound to substances is more red, whereas deoxygenated hemoglobin is a little more purple. Blood contributes to about 8% of our total body weight. So we're carrying around 4 to 6 liters, which has some weight to it. Now, this carbonic acid bicarbonate ion buffer system, sometimes just called the bicarbonate buffer system, really helps to maintain that range of 7.35 to 7.45. Now, this buffer system is a very important way in which carbon dioxide can be transported from metabolically active tissues to the lungs. So these active tissues are going to evolve off carbon dioxide as a byproduct of glucose catabolism. Also, they make metabolic water that way. And when we have carbon dioxide and water together, these two are in a dynamic equilibrium with carbonic acid. H2CO3. Carbonic acid is a weak acid. It quickly dissociates into bicarbonate ion and protons. So there is also a dynamic equilibrium between carbonic acid and bicarbonate ion and protons. And so the direction of all of these reactions will behave according to Le Chatelier's principle. So when we tweak one side, the reactions are going to shift. Now, most of the carbon dioxide produced by metabolically active tissues, probably a good 80 to 85% of it, will be transported through the blood as some part of this buffer system. Now, when we bring the blood close to the lungs, CO2 is able to evolve out of solution and enter into the alveoli where it can be exhaled. Now, whenever blood moves outside of that range of 7.35 to 7.45, this buffer system can kick in. So, for instance, whenever there is an overabundance of protons, or whenever blood is going to be below 7.35, so acidemia, this reaction can shift that way, more towards producing carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide can be expelled from the lungs with faster breathing. So in addition to having this buffer system, this buffer system will also work with the respiratory and the urinary system to help eliminate excess molecules. So for instance, under acidic conditions, this reaction shifts to the left. We produce more CO2, and that CO2 can be cleared by the lungs. So one of the means of compensating for acidemia is by increasing the rate of respiration. So most adults are going to have a typical rate of respiration somewhere between 12 to 20 breaths per minute. Now, with an elevated rate of respiration, so that's tachypnea, anything above 20 breaths per minute is going to be blowing off excess CO2. So with acidemia, we have this shift towards creating more carbon dioxide and an elevated rate of respiration for letting go of that extra acid. When we have a diminished concentration of protons, we can shift the reaction to the right and make more bicarbonate ions. So we can store bicarbonate ions or extra protons in carbonic acid. Now it's true that this can dissociate into bicarb and extra protons, but we have the kidneys that can deal with eliminating excess protons and bicarbonate ions in a region called the distal convoluted tubule of the nephron. So these kidneys can act as dynamic filters for the blood. So if we can't modulate through respiration, we can modulate through the kidneys. Now the individual blood components, if we were to think of blood as a solution, solutions have two parts. There's going to be the solute and the solvent. The solute is everything that gets dissolved or incorporated in the solvent. And the solvent here is water. So when we think of the individual components of the blood, we have the formed elements, which are the cells and any cell fragments, and then the blood plasma. The blood plasma is predominantly water. About 92% of blood plasma is water. Hence, the plasma is the solvent. And within that plasma are quite a bit of solutes. So there are various proteins that get dissolved within the blood plasma or carried within the blood plasma. So the three main categories are albumins, globulins, and fibrinogens. Albumins are the main serum protein, so over half of the proteins in the blood plasma are albumins. These predominantly have either a transport function, so they'll carry other molecules in the blood, or they help to maintain colloidal osmotic pressure within the blood. The next most abundant are the globulins. Globulins have more of an immune function, and in particular, immunoglobulins, or antibodies, are serum proteins. And then we also have fibrinogens, which are the main clotting or coagulation proteins within the blood. There are other solutes, so electrolytes, nutrients, blood gases, hormones, waste products within the blood plasma, but that's 55% of the total of whole blood. The remaining 45% are the formed elements, which we discuss in greater detail in the formed element video, but these are erythrocytes or red blood cells, platelets or thrombocytes, and leukocytes or white blood cells. So these formed elements are going to carry gases, they're red blood cells, clotting, thrombocytes, or modulate immune responses if they're leukocytes. And that leads us to our assessment question, and that is, what are the three main categories of functions of blood? A, transportation, osmoregulation, and protection. B, transportation, pH regulation, and protection. C, transportation, regulation, and protection. Or D, transportation, thermoregulation, and protection. Well, if you notice, all of these elements have transportation within them. They all have protection within them, and they vary by what is being regulated. So osmoregulation does occur within the blood, as does pH regulation and thermoregulation. So this can fall under the umbrella of regulation. Hence, C is the correct answer, with transportation, regulation, and protection being the three major categories of blood function. Thank you very much for your time.